Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I really do mean a good morning because can you hear that outside? That's if you want to know where those birds are coming from, is that they've long since built up a nest, but just up between the gutters and the anti-burglar alarm. So if you hear them chirping in the background, that's probably where it is. In fact, I would dare even say that it is currently 11 minutes past 9 in the morning, and this is probably the earliest I've ever actually had to make a video for quite a long time. And if you're not interested in the ramifications or the implications of Chris's financial woeship, then I would advise you to skip because, well, I'm sort of covering the entire chronology of Chris's financial crises, as if it were, because unlike things like the Great Depression or the credit crunch, or the fact that Greece's economy collapses every several minutes, this, however, has been going on for years, and Chris has done nothing except make it visibly worse. But unlike Chris himself, the finances tell a much bleaker story of Chris's situation. So let's just get the show on the road, and we can hopefully get this done before 10 o'clock. So, time is money, as they say. So first, March 2016. 1st of March, Chris buys a PlayStation 4 worth $540 from Fingerhut using one credit card. The 16th of March, Bob is found guilty in a debt case involving Discovery Bank. The judgment states that she owes $4,706.93. The 19th of March, Chris spends $425 on a single Lego set, available for $75 less on the official Lego website. Of these, Chris spending money that he probably doesn't have, Barbara being found guilty for money she should have paid back anyway, but for some reason she just didn't, and Chris willfully just throws. And bear in mind, this was like a day before this was when Chris just straight up begged for money online, and then, well, you can't. When you hear stuff like that, you immediately assume that Chris's situation can nowhere nearly be as that bad. If you have this much money to burn anyway, and when you decide, because when you are in the red zone, usually what you do is that you live very frugally. What Chris doesn't do is, well, anything that anybody else would do. So that's, but this gets worse, by the way. On the 12th of April, Chris begs. The video is notable for the first video devoted to asking for money. On the 16th, it is revealed that Chris borrowed $3,000 from a payday loan. Payday loans can charge nearly somewhere up to 400% on the interest, so don't do that, by the way. On the 24th, Chris begs again, only this time it is without offering crafts in exchange, so it is literally scrounging, basically, as you might say. The 16th of May, however, in May, however, things take a bit of a turn. The 4th, the donations listing on Chris's Etsy shop is removed, presumably from violating terms of service. On the 9th, Chris spends nearly $60 on his waifu, a Japanese body pillow named Naru. On the 23rd, the Chandlers pay $616.52 for the first half of 14 Branch Lanes Court 2016 file property tax draft. So, there we are. That's them actually trying to pay some stuff off. Also on the 23rd, Chris begs for bananas. He also announces the debut of a support button on his YouTube channel to replace the Etsy listing. And this is the one where Chris again shows off his body pillow. And whilst I will be doing like a videos, doing like a chronology of the financial crisis itself, yes, almost every single video where Chris begs, you can see him visibly surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of Lego sets, and then Chris just adds more onto it, as though Chris hasn't really worked out why some people are a little bit skeptical about whether Chris is really in debt at all. Meanwhile, on the 25th, Chris begs in a Facebook post while reminding readers that Etsy removed his donation listing and that he has a support button on YouTube instead. On the 26th, Chris begs on Facebook again, only this time links to his game stream of Uncharted and repeats his statements from the 25th. Yeah, something about Chris completing a level, and then Chris ends the video by saying, "There, I made it out alive. Now give me $5." This time, Chris doesn't even have any sentiment of gratitude or appreciation. It's just, give me the money now. On the 28th, Chris spends nearly $100 on Transformers toys. On the 29th, Chris spends another $30 on his waifu. I don't know why. Do you need like an extra case or something like that? Goodness knows what Chris has been doing to that thing. On the 31st of May, Chris spends $150 more on Transformers toys. So, upon reading that, I would be under the assumption that, well, Chris was not struggling at all, and this was just merely an attempt to squeeze money out of his viewers however he could. But it doesn't seem to have worked for reasons we'll get to shortly. In June, on the 8th, Chris's Etsy shop is closed for good, presumably for failing to send orders. There you are, guys. Now, bear in mind, 100, 150... Let's just call this $300 for all the difference it makes. $300, you could have sent nearly 100 orders. And that's presumably why Chris is like, well, being issued this. Because, again, this was such an easy thing to avoid and such an easy way to make even more money. But apparently Chris values himself more than he does for his own responsibilities, which is not new, but it's very, very silly. On the 11th, Chris begs for money in the same video in which he announces that his shop is closed. Starting from this video, Chris adds his begging to the video descriptions. On the 14th, Chris begs to have $100 for Barbara's asthma medicine in 2 videos which feature Bob. The first video, which Chris deleted after 5 minutes because Bob was asleep, but a lot of people presume that she was just straight up dead. And the second one where Bob was awake but seemed to have no real idea what was going on. On the 17th, Chris begs to have $200 for an electric bill, which really a fanfic called Unicorns, Rainbows and a Bluebird of Happiness. One would assume Chris could have done like a lot better if he just got on with reading the story and then just left out any resemblance to begging whatsoever. And bear in mind, guys, one thing you're going to be seeing throughout all of this is that Chris does not seek employment once. I think we can presume why that is, but still, it couldn't have hurt to try at this point. On the 19th, Chris begs again, saying he wants... Okay, we've done that. Okay, also on the 19th, Chris wants to become a prostitute in an attempt to get both money and China. To kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but as you can imagine, this straight up, nothing comes of this. Thank God for that. On the 26th, Chris begs his half-brother Cole Smithy for financial help, while simultaneously insulting him for pissing and burning the money he earns from working as a movie critic on an apartment rent. Cole Smithy apparently has yet to respond to this. On the 29th, also, by the way, can we just also point out that Chris's ideas of gratitude are rather a little bit backwards. Chris demanding help, but also insulting the person you're helping. Yeah, that's definitely going to make them help, isn't it? On the 29th, Chris begs, saying that even though he got donations, he wants more because we could still do better, before reading the 3rd chapter of Bluebird. We could still do better. Well, it's. I love how the fact that Chris... Why doesn't Chris just say, I could do better? Because, well... Chris as well also see Chris's ego suddenly starts to go completely out of control. If Chris is now under the impression that he can just call all the shots and say that, it's other people's fault. July 1st, Chris pays his $541 in court costs for pepper spraying a GameStop employee in 2014. Something that you know fine well could have been easily avoided, but, well, we know that apparently Sonic's arms were far too much a priority in Chris's eyes. On the 8th, Chris begs while reading Chapter 4 of Bluebird. On the 9th, Chris begs in a long rant saying he is stressed from dealing with finances. He mentions a mortgage among the bills. He wants food for himself, Bob, and their pets. Between the 10th and the 11th, Chris begs in a series of 4 videos, wanting $20 or $50. He demands himself on camera to get people to donate. Finally, he thanks people for sending him the minimum $20 before begging to have more money for Bob's teeth. Also of note is apparently in the 3rd video of these, Chris did apparently did a paid video request sent by the mysterious Mr. Enter, although speculations have arisen that it's probably someone impersonating him, since Mr. Enter has gone on record saying that he's never had any record of doing such a thing. On the 13th, Bob begs to have more money for a dental work, in what is, yes, absolutely, you're reading that right, the first time Bob has actually had to be on camera to do Chris's dirty work. On the 13th, also, Chris finally decides to sell some of his toys to raise money. He lists one Pokemon card on eBay for $50. On the 14th, Chris lists 2 more Pokemon cards on eBay for $100 each. On the 15th, Chris begs for food money in a Facebook post, complaining that people aren't willing to donate anymore. Well, after hearing that, I would have encouraged people not to donate either. Remember, Chris is not a charity. If you want to donate to charity, go donate to Oxfam or the British Heart Foundation, or one of those guys, or Save the Children, not Save the Man Children. On the 18th, Chris begs for money in the same video in which he reads an anniversary dedication, while expecting to be paid $50 for it. Wow, Chris. Okay. Also on the 18th, one of the $100 Pokemon cards Chris has listed on eBay is sold. Like, holy, Chris actually made some money that day. Whilst we're probably also sure Chris burned. If you pay Chris $100 for something, he's probably going to spend $110. He has a permanent overdraft on life. He does. But between the 20th and the 22nd, Chris produces 8 videos to earn money from his fan base. On the 23rd, Chris returns to begging on Facebook. What a surprise! He also mentions that this window is for donations only. No video requests until further notice. After his YouTube account receives its 2nd strike after it's violating policy on nudity or sexual content, after a video he uploaded on the 22nd got reported. He also begs to a Kiwi Farms user named Crayola Sword, who asks him about the situation. On the 24th, Chris announces on Facebook that he has grown a labia using subliminal frequency hypnosis on YouTube. He also requests donations for gender reassignment. So far, what we've managed to actually decipher, guys, is that Chris's priorities are a little bit backwards. Anything resembling priorities immediately gets sidelined for things that Chris considers to be priorities, and well, this only gets worse. By the way, if you think this is bad so far, this only gets worse. Just like everything else in Chris's life. On the 26th, 3 days after being barred from uploading videos to his Quickfill Guardian YouTube account, Chris circumvents the ban by uploading to another account, restarting the paid video request program and accepting offers for $10 to $50. On the 28th, Chris makes one sale on the video program. On the 16th, we see that this is Capital One Bank versus Bob, and Chris apparently fined by Greene County for not doing appropriate dog tags for his dogs, or even getting rabies checked for them. And Why would again this would help suggest why Bob's finances are also so completely out of control, because anything they're actually supposed to do, they just ignore them. Unbelievable. Anyway, on the 4th of August, Bob is sued yet again by another bank. The hearing would take place on September 14th. On the 5th, Chris pays $121 in court costs and fines for failing to acquire proper certifications for Clover and Snoopy. Also on the 5th, Chris begs for donations in the Facebook posts and asks for tubes of estrogel to be sent to him. On the 9th, Chris relists the birthday Pikachu card on eBay for $500 and begs people to buy it now and help me and my family. He also offers a VHS tape of Aladdin for $3,000. The reason why the pricing was so high for this is that Chris was under the assumption that the Black Diamond editions of like classic Disney films were worth a lot of money, or something like that. On the 11th, Chris begs Cole Smithy for financial help again, this time by saying, "Hey Cole, get off your ass and apologize and make peace for us here in person and help us financially, please." You remember what I was saying earlier about, Chris, it's not a good idea to insult the person whilst also asking for help. Chris doubles down on this, if nothing. Chris can't do anything except double down, and it takes an awful amount of work, guys, to be this shameless. On the 14th, a buyer purchases the Megatron pistol for Chris, netting Chris $50. It's the first relic of fail to be sold during the crises. On the 31st of August, Chris begs his audience on Facebook to pay his mortgage of $115,000. And when I say Chris begs his audience, we could almost mentally replace that with saying that Chris is not going to do anything to pay for it himself because it's his own responsibility, and apparently Chris thinks that this is the responsibility of other people, and he doesn't have to do jack shit about it. Now we move on to September. On the 12th, Chris is spotted and photographed at a Toys R Us buying 2 tins of Pokemon cards 2 days before his mother goes to court. On the 14th, Greene County's court rules that Bob owes $15,906.99 in unpaid debt to Capital One Bank. On the 19th, Chris begs in a Facebook post while showing off his new pet cat. He wants money to cover bills for the second half of the month, one paragraph after stating that he needed allowance fun to get a break from stress in the first half of the month. Right, I see. Not gonna happen, by the way. On the 27th, Chris claims in a video that the fickle finances are improving for him and Bob, shortly before playing his newly bought Transformers toys, showing that he is unaware or does not care about the fact that his mother legally owes over $20,000 as a result of the 2 lawsuits filed against her in 2016, or that the property tax for the house will be due in 2 months. Wait until we... I want to... Again, the revelation when this comes about is quite interesting. In October, on the 18th, Chris resumes begging in a video, saying that he is sick and he is running low on chicken noodle soup and money. Notably, he had spent $160 buying Transformers toys on eBay in the weeks beforehand. Chris legitimately just does not get this, does he? And it gets better again because, well, this is a 1 cent donation. On the 9th, Chris, in a response to the election, films a video of him destroying a Transformer toy that is meant to represent Donald Trump. The toy was part of a Transformers toy purchased back in September, costing him $25. On the 18th, Chris spends $90 on Pokemon and Transformers. Presumably this was on both Sun and Moon, because Chris clearly needed both for some reason. Actually, maybe he only spent it on one and then got Transformers or something, I don't know. On the 21st, the Chandlers paid the second half of their 2016 property tax for 14 Branch Lane Court, costing them $616.52. Also on the 21st, Chris makes another video to beg for donations again. He also posts to Twitter saying, "We need more money, please. The mortgage people are kicking us again. Please send us money to via PayPal." On the 22nd, Chris reacts to a penny donated by a troll, tweeting, "We need donations larger than a penny apiece. Please try to give us $10 or a lot more than that." You know, if I, you know what, guys, if I had said something like that, someone would give me a kick in the nuts if I said something like that, because now all of a sudden, Chris, again, despite what's been happening so far in 2016, Chris is somehow under the impression, after all this time, that beggars can also be choosers. And Chris can Chris not see the shortfall of his logic? Sadly, no, Chris can't do that. Or no, Chris can do that. I think he just chooses not to. On the 30th, Chris posts that he will join Patreon after Bob had to pawn a necklace, which she said she had to sell at a significant loss for $325 to pay debts and bills. Also on the 30th, Chris updates his Christmas wish list to remove the $50 Transformers toy, named Alpha Trion and Astro Train, which he had bought. He does not pawn this, however, or any of his other toys to help Bob. Instead, he makes a video of himself playing with it. On the 30th, also on the 30th, Chris launches his Patreon account. He states that he wants $200,000 to pay the home's finances, including the mortgage and credit cards. He also says he wanted extra $50,000 for rainy days. Well, unfortunately for Chris, it's not rainy days, it's that there's storm clouds brewing on the horizon. Especially once we get to 2018. And in December, on the 1st, Chris updates his Patreon with more gifts, consisting of merchandise from Skylanders, customized to appear like his in-game avatar, which would be produced by that company, and clarifies that he wants $250,000 total, rather than per month, showing that he still has unrealistic views on how much he can scam out of people. On the 2nd, Chris uploads Alpha Trion Young Warrior Challenge Explained, in which he plugs his Patreon channel while playing with Expense's Transformers toys. On the 19th, Bob wants to sell a riding lawnmower tractor for $595. Presumably, nobody bought it. Or at least there's been no mention of anybody buying it. And, by the way, guys, that is just 2016. Now we move on to 2017, and that's, if you thought this was annoying before, well, God help us all, because this only gets worse. And when I say worse, I mean a lot worse. January. On the 4th, Chris whines about having head of household worries like the bills and debt. However, instead of adulting and applying for a job, he begs to have $500 a month. On the 13th, over 3 weeks after the original lawnmower tractor ad was taken down by Craigslist due to a ween, Chris finally realized what happened and reposted it, still asking for $595. In the meantime, he had bought over $100 worth of Pokemon and Skylanders toys and had made videos of himself playing with them. This is apparently far more important than just paying bills or setting any money aside for emergencies to pay for said bills. February. On the 16th, Chris uploads a browsing around an old playground, in which he begs for money before showing footage of himself walking around a playground. On the 17th, one day after begging for handouts of $10 per person, Chris plays a newly purchased video game level for LEGO Dimensions, the LEGO Batman Movie Story Pack, which had released on the 10th of February, which with a cost between $35 to $50. Now I know what you guys are probably saying to yourself is that, why doesn't Chris stream any of the other hundreds of video games that Chris owns and could easily have just done via his PS4? Good questions that will never be answered. Sadly. Well, not sadly, this was a perfect opportunity and Chris just never thought to do it. For one reason or another. In March, on the 1st, Chris offers parts of Bob's stamp collection for sale. On the 2nd, Chris spends $50.25 on toys after making $68 minus the cost of shipping for selling his father's stamps. Starting to notice a small pattern in this. On the 3rd, Chris lists his personal stamp album for $1,000. On the 7th, Chris buys Lego World for the PS4 on its release date for $30, erasing the last of the profit he had made from selling stamps, even though he claimed to need the money for paying bills. On the 13th, he spends another $9 on Transformers. On the 19th, Chris begs on Facebook for people to buy more stamps, saying, "My mother and I could really do with the money." At that point, he had made $85 in sales, then quickly spent $90 on toys. Well, what a surprise. It's almost like what I said would have happened. What must be going through Chris's mind at this point, thinking that, again, can Chris literally not see the shortfall in his logic? Because I personally don't. Also on the 19th, White Knights spring into action and purchase 7 stamps, totaling $41.50. 5 were bought by a single person, at $34 and the rest $7.50 by 2 others. Chris, also on the 19th, lies about wasting stamp money on toys, claiming in Facebook comments section that he did not buy any Lego sets, and that the money went towards our debtor payments instead. Good to know this is where people were starting to call Chris out on all this, because, well, how do you suppose people were getting this information in the first place then? On the 17th, in April, on the 4th, Bob's bank account is over $800 in the red, after making 2 payments to Ceterus Incorporated, a loan service company, likely a result of failing to juggle both a past due account and the auto pay feature. On the 5th, I need to go shut the window. I swear there is never a good time to actually ever have that window open whenever I'm trying to make videos. Sorry, where was I? Oh yes. On the 5th, Chris throws a tantrum at his Facebook friends after they suggest he get a job and begs for sales on his high-priced stamp covers. On the 6th, Chris tweets to Cole Smithy asking for financial help. What a surprise, Chris actually learns his lesson and decides not to just insult the hell out of his half-brother this time. We're almost getting somewhere, if it wasn't already too late. On the 7th, Chris lists the Sonic Totem on eBay for $1,500. It's sold within 4 hours. It is also discovered that the value of 14 branch lane cord has decreased by $3,248 in the past 30 days, according to Zillow.com. Also on the 7th, 1 hour after the totem sale, Chris buys a $400 necklace for Bob to replace the one that she pawned in November in 2016. During the next, again, that's sort of, I can sort of see why Chris would do that, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose, though, doesn't it? During the next 3 days, he orders that just completely shoots it. He orders $750 worth of Skylanders Avatar products for his raffle prizes. On the 10th, Chris implores people to buy his $1,000 stamp album, because he had already spent the money from selling the totem. He also states that he will mail it later in the week. Yeah, about that. On the 14th, Bob begs, claiming she needs money to pay an overdue power bill, while wearing the $400 necklace Chris had bought a week before. 6 hours later, Chris records a 23-minute video of him playing with expensive toys. He also explains that he used part of the totem money sale to service his credit card debt. Is that true though? We'll wait and see. On the 17th, in a sign of complete and utter desperation, Chris slashes the price of his stamp album by half to $500 and begs people to buy it. On the 18th, Chris begs to call for the second time this month. On the 19th, Chris's PayPal account is in the red by over $1,450 because he had failed to ship the Sonic Totem, and as a result, the buyer filed a dispute and eBay or PayPal placed a temporary hold on the $1,500, pulling it from Chris's account. He lists 6 Solitude drawings from 2014 at $2,000 for the lot. Then he digs 10 to 20 bags of wet, moldy clothes left over from the destruction of Chris's house 3 years ago before and finds the classic shirt. He lists it on eBay for $12,000, or a buy it now price of $20,000. Later, he records live game streaming C-Log 04192017, the shirt, to promote the listing. And yes, that really was a thing that happened, by the way. On the 20th, Bob, and that was all in one day. On the 20th, Bob bails herself and Chris out of imminent financial ruin by borrowing from their life insurance, repeating a move she pulled in 2014. This time, she uses the cash to fix the $800 deficit on her bank account, pay for Chris to ship the Sonic Totem to its buyer, and buy groceries. On the 21st, the Sonic Totem buyer receives it in the mail and leaves positive feedback. The item arrived safely. Since the dispute was resolved, the sale money was then released to Chris, putting his PayPal back in the black. On the 22nd, the auction for the classic shirt concludes, bid to $25,100. That's more than some people do make in an entire year, by the way. On the 27th, Chris asks people to buy his stamp album for $500, since his bank account is still in the red. He also mentions that the classic shirt buyer had not paid him $25,100 for it yet, and he would give her until the next day to begin paying. On the 30th, the raffle concludes. Chris had revenue of $165.76, but spent $790 on prizes and is obligated to spend $90 more, leaving him with a negative profit of $714.24. So Chris probably should have looked into why Chris did not try to organize the logistics about why this sort of thing was a bad idea in the first place, because a negative profit of $714, Chris, you've got a few ideas above your station if you think that was a good idea. And that, by the way, was just April. Now we move on to May. On the 5th of May on eBay, Chris halves the pricing of 2 listings, his stamp album again to $250, and a collection of Solitude drawings from 2014 to $1,000. And as before, he begs people to buy it on Facebook. Also on the 5th, in a jaw-dropping move of hypocrisy, Chris mocks Cole Smithy on Twitter by requesting donations on Patreon. Wow. Also on the 5th, Chris claims his bank account is in the red for the second time in a week, due to the auto pay for one of his bills, echoing the exact problem Bob claimed in the previous month. Chris's monthly tugboat had deposited $1,300 to him 2 days beforehand. He also realizes that the classic bidder won't be paying for it anytime soon. On the 8th, over the course of a week, Chris had spent $90 on 6 new PS4 games, even though he had said in his bank account was in the red. PSN allows PayPal for purchases, so Chris was either lying or being financially irresponsible by using his PayPal to fund the purchases instead of transferring the money into his bank. Also on the 8th, after 561 days since the last update to the Sonichu comic, which he had been paid over $1,000 to do for 100 pages, but Chris only did 16, Chris resumes work on it. He requests donations and pledges to his Patreon for his effort. A day later, he had gotten 0 new pledges. Also, Chris, what Cole really should have paid. You only get 1 dirty penny, and that's far more what a fake trans autistic adult like you deserves, so there. On the 10th, Chris again halves the price of the Sonichu drawings to $500 and begs for a sale, stating, "My mum and I could do with some more money, please." Why not get a job, Chris? It's like, you can't... Okay, you know what? I'm going to take a small break from this because what's like I'm really like what's really bugging me throughout this article is the fact that all Chris has visibly done for days, and I do mean for days, weeks, months, is just beg and beg and beg. And you know why I've got such a bugbear with stuff like that? It's because Chris is acting as though it's somebody else's responsibility. Chris thinks that other people are the ones who should be paying for Chris's lifestyle, for Chris's house, for his mother, for his food, for his dogs, for his toys, for the electricity, for the power, for the mortgage, the tax. Chris is under the impression it's someone else who has to do this, not him. And that is almost the sole root cause of the problem, outside of Chris being, well, financially completely deranged and mad. Which I would say that's probably also why people have caught on to the idea about why it's not a good idea to donate for Chris. Also, in particular, Chris does not exactly look very grateful, thankful, or doesn't really seem to have learned anything from this experience, because 1, this experience is still ongoing, and 2, what do you suppose Chris has actually done to showcase that he's learned anything from this experience? Nothing. Why? Because Chris does not. Because Chris somehow thinks it's a good idea to just carry on as though everything was normal before, from spending money on Transformers or spending money on video games or anything like that. That's what Chris does. And it's just infuriating to hear, because a lot of the problem... I mean, Chris would have still been in the red no matter what, but there could have been ways in which Chris could have reduced the damage. Anyway, on the 11th, Chris links to his new PayPal.me account and begs for financial help. Also on the 11th, Bob is allowing her bank account to be in the red after a mortgage payment, less than a week after mocking Cole for not reconciling with Bob. Chris begs for money, asking for $1,000. On the 14th, another live stream of Chris drawing Sonichu comic pages is recorded, clocking in at 1 hour and 38 minutes of footage. Chris begs for $10 donations or pledges to Patreon in the video description. On the 15th, Chris records himself using Photoshop for an hour and a half. He begs for his audience to please donate big now. It should be noted that he filmed himself surrounded by expensive electronics such as his PS4 camera and laptop, presumably a newly acquired one, as it had not been mentioned by Chris before. But Chris is still demanding people. I'm not even saying begging at this point. Demanding is the operative word. On the 16th, Chris tries to demand from Cole again, still demanding $1,000. On the 17th, the Chandlers pay the first half of the 2017 property tax for 14 Branchling Court, costing them $606.83. On the 19th, after announcing that Sonichu issue 11 pages will be ready in a few days, Chris demands for handouts. Later that day, he discovers that his cat Sorbet had been seriously injured and takes him to a vet. On the 24th, Chris demands for handouts on video, claiming to demand money for food and mentioning that he was charged $160 for Sorbet's vet bill. He demands for donations to be at least $1 and suggests, well, demands as well, a minimum $10 minimum. An hour later, he uploads another video, angered at having received a donation of less than $1. In the second video, Barb appears and joins in the begging, demanding money for meal replacement shakes. On the 25th, Chris links to the first of his previous day's videos on Facebook and demands again. He also deletes the second video. The reason why Chris did delete the second video is because people left angry responses saying that Chris's treatment of his video could be considered a form of elder abuse. And Chris obviously didn't back down. Well, Chris obviously backed down immediately because he immediately deleted it. In June, Barb demands for food money while wearing both a $400 gold necklace and a pearl necklace. Shortly after, Chris posts as an in-progress solitude page to Patreon and demands on that platform for grocery money. In July, on the 11th, Mariner Finance sues Chris for an unpaid debt. On the 22nd, Chris, after a month without demanding, due to a boost in Patreon funds after Chris revived the Solitude comic, demands $50. He had given that amount to Doopy Doo-Over earlier that month as a pledge on her Patreon. Oh, here we go. Listen. Actually, you know what? You don't have to listen. But why again? Chris was to give credit to Chris. He was doing so well until he started to screw himself over again for no reason apart from, well, he wanted to get into Doopy's pants. That's probably why. I mean, what else? What other motivation does Chris have whenever he talks to any woman for more than 5 minutes anyway? On the 1st of August, Chris pledges more money to Doopy Doo-Over's Patreons, hoping to receive anthropomorphized lesbian My Little Pony porn in return. That was a sentence, that was. Doopy, aware of Chris and both Barb's financial straits, offers to refund Chris's payments to her, but he refuses. Between the 11th to the 13th, Chris makes an expensive 3-day trip to BronyCon in Maryland. Other attendees have stated that the cost for going to BronyCon is around $2,000 to $3,000, when including travel, food, souvenirs, and lodging. On the 18th, Chris informs his Patreons of a 2-week delay in sending their books, as he had blown their funds on BronyCon instead. I would have pulled out of Chris's Patreon immediately if anyone had told me that. On the 24th, Mariner Finance's unpaid debt case against Chris is somehow dropped. I do mean somehow. I have no idea how. In September, on the 1st, Chris donates $20 to the Red Cross to help victims in the wake of Hurricane Harvey in Texas, after seeing a message from Tara Strong on Twitter. On the 9th of October, Chris records an updated intro for his Patreon, stating that he still needs the income for it for bills. In November, on the 6th, Chris reveals that he had purchased an Xbox One at some point recently, and looking at his Game/account, he has spent around $549.93 on it. On the 7th, Chris buys Sonic Forces on release date at the price of $39.99. Wow. I'm actually going to take a small break here from that because I don't know about you, but that was a lot to take in. And so far in the first third of the subsequent crises, several things are needed to be explained. The first is that Chris doesn't really seem to understand, again, but the biggest concern for Chris so far is that Chris doesn't really seem to understand the concept of needs versus wants, because Chris wants Transformers but he also needs to pay off his debt and to look after his mother, his dogs, to pay for bills and all the rest of it. Be right back. Oh no, never mind. So, in situations as dire as that, here's the thing. Because I've been in situations before where things looked rather bad, but you know what? You sort yourself out, you make appropriate changes where needed, and you get on with it. And also, bear in mind, Chris did not think about applying for work at one point throughout all of this. You want to know how this could get any worse? Well, I will tell you how this gets worse, because this is not the end of it. This is, in many ways, this is just the beginning. Also, it should also be stated that, well, Chris's demands for payments were quite frankly outrageous and ludicrous, and as a means of just, well, showing how much Chris just does not care at all, Chris, and like I said before, I was not exaggerating when I said Chris is under the very sad impression that it's everybody else's responsibility to give him money to pay for Chris's debts for him, and to just Chris, you ever heard of the expression that nobody owes X, Y, and Z a living? Well, this is one of those occasions where nobody owes Chris a free pass to avoid all responsibility, because if you give money to Chris, you are paying for him to avoid responsibility for another day, a week in some cases, because let's face it, Chris doesn't really have that much to worry about, both back then and even to this day. Because the fact that Chris got off on all of this quite well, when you think about it, it's actually kind of tragic. But we'll come to the second part of the crises between 2018 and 2019 next time. So thank you for listening once again. Thank you.